Welcome to the Westwood Planning Board meeting. Let's rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Westwood Planning Board meeting. My name is Brian Gorman, and I will be chairing this meeting. The meeting is video recorded by Westwood Media Center. If anyone else wishes to record the meeting, please identify yourself so that the audience is aware. Seeing none. As a friendly reminder, please turn off your cell phone ringers. The meeting will be civil and all people will be treated respectfully. This includes no clapping, booing, or interruptions from the audience. In the event of a disruption, the chair will give a warning the first time, and if it occurs again, the individual will be requested to leave the meeting. The format of the meeting will be when an item is called, the applicant will come forward to the podium to present the application to the board. The board will proceed to staff comments. The board members will ask questions of the applicant. For public hearing items, the public will be given an opportunity to comment. Items that are not a public hearing, the opportunity of the public comment will be at the discretion of the board. When it is time for the public comment period, the chair will call those wishing to speak to the podium to use the microphone. Once at the podium, please identify yourself. Please direct all comments and questions through the chair. All people will be given the opportunity to speak, but in the interest of time and fairness, repetitive or off-topic comments may be cut short. First off, Abby, are there any changes to the agenda?
The only change is I would request item number 1. That's the continued public hearing for the open space and recreation plan.
Okay.
In July, you continued it to tonight. We are still working with our consultant to provide the requested information before coming back to you at those revisions. So I request, I think we'll need a little more time.
Revisions based on what's coming out of the Comprehensive Plan Committee? What are the...
In July, the State Department of Conservation and Recreation had conditionally approved the open space plan.
Yeah.
Open space and recreation plan, and they had asked for some more information and additions and changes to the plan. So you still need to respond to those, complete those items before resubmitting it to the state for a final review.
Okay. And where were those, which packet were those given to the board on?
It was, I think at your July 23rd meeting, you continued it to tonight.
So those comments from the state will be, if I click on it for their...
Yeah, and you had it in your packet for tonight.
Just carried forward.
The letter, it was a letter just dated July 10th.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that's the only change.
Yes.
Okay, great. So the first order of business, as Abby has just mentioned, is the open space and recreational plan. So should we make a motion to move that?
I make a motion to continue the public hearing to Tuesday, November 5th at 7 p.m. at 50 Carby Street to allow more time to complete requested revisions.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, so that's 4-0 for the vote. Okay, second item on the agenda is 200 Station Drive, University Station. So this is the Citizens Bank signature package review. We request the applicant to come forward to the podium. Thank you for coming this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jeff Tompkins. I'm with Spagnuolo Geisness and Associates, and we're from Boston, Massachusetts. We're representing the owner of the project.
Sorry, I'm working to get it pulled up on the screen. It's just a new, I'm having a little technical difficulties, but I have someone running to go get it.
Okay,
Let me see if I can. Let me see if I can pull it up through the website. Let me take a minute. Yes, that would be great. We can stick it right in. Stick it right in here, and it should pop up. Okay. Okay, thank you. All right. Okay. Okay. Oh, here it is. Okay. Thank you, Karen. We can, or we can wait till I can do that one next. Thank you, Karen. Is that the whole folder for tonight? Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. All right. Is it, click on this one? Okay, I can hardly see that. Okay, this one, I can't quite read that.
There's a bunch of stuff. It's the top PDF.
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Abby. So, so today we're going to present the signage for 200 Station Drive. This is on the building that was approved on April 23rd, thereabouts, by the board. Table of contents, we have we'll have a key plan that we'll walk through. We'll have a location overview of the signage on the elevations, an area summary table, the exterior signage on renderings that were previously presented to the board, and then the signage specifications for each one of the sign types as we walk through that. So here's the site plan, big site, so it's a little small, but as you can see, we have M1 monument sign that would be at the entrance off of Harvard Street. I don't know if, Paul, maybe you could help me by doing the Vanna White thing. And then that will be the entry the monument sign that's in the lower left-hand corner of the page. Then to the opposite end, we have the M2 sign. That would be the entrance directly off of Station Drive. And we'll show details of these a little bit later on. W2, which is a daisy building wall sign, is in various locations on the building. Will be easier to see in the elevations where those are. W3 is a smaller, what we call pedestrian daisy, that will also be on the wall. W1 is a logo building wall sign, so that's on the exterior facade of the building on the corner, and we can show that in a minute. W4 is a canopy sign that'll be over the main entry just above the address. And S1 is a sculpture that is the daisy in a sculpture in the center drive aisle that's directly in front of the building. And then D1 is wayfinding signage that would be throughout the parking facility. The vast majority of this would be directional signage, just pointing people to different parts of the driveways. And the most of it occurs on the corner of the building, which is really handicap signage, parking, visitor parking signage, just directing folks as to where the most appropriate places to park are. And then there's some parking lot letter system so that you can recall where you parked. So on our elevations, we can see where the W1 sign is. I'll start at the top, east elevation front. W1 sign is will be a backlit sign up in the corner. We're proposing that right up through here on the two corners of the building. So that would be on the north elevation and the east elevation. The W3 small daisies, you can start to see them in little portions down at the lower levels where the pedestrian level, slightly above head height. There's two W2 signs on the west elevation and the south elevation, which is the larger daisy you can see here. And we'll show the renderings in a minute. You can see those in color. And we have the height listed in this table, the height, the width, the total square footage, and the quantity to get the total square footage of the project. According to the zoning bylaws, we're allowed 438. We're just at slightly over 430, 430.9 square feet of signage with those signs. And then here are the renderings where we can see how they look on the building. And you can see here, this would be the south and the east elevation, where we have the illuminated W1 sign on the upper part of the building. We have the W4 sign, which is illuminated over the canopy structure. You can see here. And then the W3 daisy, which is on the wall, is not illuminated. So just to reiterate, W1, W4 is illuminated. And then the S1 sculpture, which is in the island, is not internally illuminated, but it is illuminated by lighting that is mounted in the stone pediment that it sits on. The other rendering from the other direction, where we can still see the W1. The daisy on that end up in the corner is also internally illuminated. That's the W2 daisy. W4 and W1 are repeated from the previous elevation, as is S1 on the island. And then you see the two smaller W3s, which are not illuminated daisies at the pedestrian level. This is a better, sort of head-on shot of that elevation where you can see the signage, W4s, W3s, and the sculptural piece. And here are the details of the individual signs. So this is the M1 monument sign, where we can see it's 6'4" wide, it's 7 feet total in height. It's got a base which has the 200 Station Drive address on it, and it has the spacing around the signage. This is an internally illuminated sign, where the white is illuminated. Next signage piece is the M2 monument sign. This is on the University Station side. It will have the citizens signage and Station Drive. Yep, sorry. And then it has, and then it will have a sign panel for a building that is yet to be constructed. This is also internally illuminated, and it will be similar to the other signage that is throughout the park. The next sign is the large W1 sign that goes up in the building. This, again, is internally illuminated, 40 feet long, 4.42 feet high. It's a white translucent letter that will be modified with a green acrylic and internally illuminated. Here's the dimensions of the W2 daisy, 4.396 feet in square. And then this is also will be manufactured in a similar way as the other W1 sign, which will be internally illuminated. And then the W3 sign, just a smaller version of that. This is not illuminated. So this is the smaller daisy, the W3 daisy, 2.5 feet square. And then the canopy element. This also, because it's harder to see in those renderings, we also have white vinyl cut letters at the door to show the address, 200 Station Drive, and then on top of the canopy we'll have the Citizens Bank. And then lastly, the sculpture that sits in the island right directly across from the entry, 7 feet tall, 7 feet wide, on a 2-foot stone base with stainless steel pin-mounted letters denoting the address, and then we'll have a LumaPulse fixture that would be installed within the stone base element, and then it will illuminate up onto that sign with a high cutoff ratio. That's really it for the presentation portion.
Great,
Can
thank
I
you.
answer any questions?
Yes, Abby, are there any staff comments with this application?
I believe this one was revised slightly because my recommendation was to include the address, the property address on the monument signs for public safety reasons so they can find the entrance. And then for internally illuminated signs, the illumination's only allowed to show through the letters and the logo. So I would request that the sign package be revised to clarify that the internal illumination is only through the letters and the logo, not through the whole background of the sign.
Yeah. Is that clear?
Yep.
Yeah,
That is clear.
I agree with that.
Okay.
And nothing additional from staff or?
I didn't have any other comments.
Right. So we can go to board members. So if there are any questions or comments, you want to start, Dave?
Sure. So on the monument signs, since you don't know what the upper office business will be, what's that going to look like at first? Is it going to be blank, or will it be all green?
No, it'll be a blank panel. It would not be green.
I'm just like wanting to, so that it doesn't look,
You're talking about this,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
lower panel here?
just so that it doesn't look obviously empty or something. I don't know, like it's.
I think what we could do is that where we have the Station Drive logo, where we have the University Park logo, that we could match that metal so that it sits in there and it doesn't.
Right, so it's not just an empty
No.
space.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And that is externally illuminated, right? Like the monument signs have.
That's internally illuminated.
But it won't glow green though. It's
The
yeah,
white letters will.
Just the
will
white
be-
letters. Okay.
Yeah, correct. And then that blank panel won't glow at all, because it would be covered.
All right, that's all.
Okay, great. Deb?
So will the illuminated ones be illuminated 24/7, or will some of them be on timers? Will they stay lit all the time?
They would stay lit during the night, yes. Not in the day. They wouldn't be lit during the day, obviously, because there's no reason
But
to
all
light
night
them.
long? Okay.
Yeah.
And the sign faces the apartments and towards University Ave, is that correct?
Correct. Well,
Okay. How bright are those?
I'm sorry? I'll go to the plan.
I'm just curious how bright they are.
As I said, I think it's consistent with all the other monument signs within the development where I think they're illuminated through the night. The orientation of the one that's closest to the apartment would be perpendicular to Station Drive. Sorry. Oh, sorry.
You talking about the one on the building?
Was the, I'm sorry, was the
It
question,
was the one on the building.
the one on the building? I'm sorry, I thought it was the monument
No,
sign.
no, the one on the building, because
Okay, so
And that's backlit?
internally, the letters are lit from within the letters? So it's an operational question, I guess, as to whether or not it's appropriate to have the sign lit through the night. Is that what the
yeah, I'm just
question
curious
is?
as to how much glare there's going to be from that to the apartments as well as to the condos. When you think of the Citgo sign, you see that from miles away. Just curious as to what that would be.
I'm stumped.
Sorry.
Not. So, it won't be as bright as the Citgo sign, I can tell you that. And when you internally illuminate a sign, it doesn't cast light in the way that a light bulb would for your reading, and it's also 4 stories above the ground. So if you're 300 feet away and that's turned on, you're not going to glow green. You're going to see it, but it's not going to change. It's not going to change the foot candles of whatever you're looking at right in front of your face. So it's not the same as turning on all the lights on a city street, or turning on or off the parking lot lights. You'll see it, but you won't. You wouldn't. It wouldn't keep you up, for instance, it wouldn't shine through your curtains, for instance. It's too far away to do any of that.
Do you have a follow-up question?
No, I don't think so.
Bill, do you have any questions?
Are you using any alternative energy to light these signs? In other words, solar panels or anything like that?
No. They'll all be through the base building electric system.
Yeah. Any thought of doing that, or?
It's very difficult to do because you don't have a battery storage facility, so you can't capture the power and use it in any way. And a lot of what we're finding to be the case on a lot of our projects, we have our office has a green initiative, so we're very careful about what we do. Is that the power grid doesn't know how to deal with PV panels. They just don't. They've basically started telling people, you can put PV panels up, but you got to figure out how to use that power. And you basically have to figure out how to use it during the day, because once the sun goes down, there's no more power from those PV panels. So it's very difficult to capture that light. Typically, what our clients are doing is if they have parking facilities that get lit even during the day, that's where they use that power, and then at night they switch that power over to normal electricity. It's just the power grid has not figured out how to use that.
The light source will be LEDs though.
Yeah, I mean, all of our lighting in here, meets the energy code. We've been very careful to be sensitive to that.
Any other questions? That's it. Yeah, my questions have been answered through some of the other board members.
Okay, great.
So at this time, I'd like to ask the public if there's any questions from the public with regards to this package. Sure.
David Cannell, 485 Canton Street. I like everything. The one thing that, because I walk that area quite a bit, the placement of the M2 sign. I think you're going to get a lot of traffic. You're going to get a lot of employees coming up and taking a left to go in there. Then as they leave at night, the people really coming down from Eversource, the people really speed. They take that turn, they come down. That sign is just going to be right in the way as people are coming out. I mean, it's even the entrance or the exit right there is going to make it a little bit difficult, but this is just going to further complicate it. So I don't know if you could move that down to the other side.
Yes, can you point that out on the?
It's
Oh,
right
it's
here.
pro-
So that people come speeding down here, they take that turn, they come down here, and then they make the other turn. On top of that, I mean, obviously in the morning, this is a rough turn coming up here because if people just pause here, people are speeding around. I mean, obviously, it's not citizens' fault, it's a speed issue. But all I'm saying is, as your employees leave, with that sign, it's 11.5 feet high. It's gonna cause a sight issue to try to get out of that parking lot. And I just wondered if you could move it to the other side. I don't know if you own that or if you could get that to the other side. Because then I think it would, knowing that it's the afternoon or the evening, I think it would eliminate that. Other than that, I think everything's great, yeah.
I have an alternative solution. Maybe it gets slipped back so that it allows you to queue up a few cars before.
Yeah, that'd be fine, as
Yeah.
long as it's not out of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, it would probably help because people would slow down a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
that's
there's no obstruction to see that if you slide that back a few feet, and you can queue up a car and still see people coming in both directions. Because I think if we move it down, then we might have a problem during the day or in the morning. Because I've seen people fly up there when I've been on site. So if we pushed it back and allow a couple cars to queue, a space for 2 cars to queue, then I think that could probably
Okay.
provide a similar solution.
Right. Thank you. And then is there any further board discussion with regards?
Just wanted to note, your 5th member, Chris Paff, couldn't be here, so he did send comments saying that he reviewed the sign package and found it to be consistent with the overall look and appearance and scale of the building and consistent with our master development plan.
Great. Thank you. Great. Anything further?
I'll make a motion that we accept the final signage as conditioned in the April 23rd PDR approval as submitted, and taking into consideration the moving of that sign a little bit to, as you described, allow for a couple of cars to be able to have a clear line of sight.
Great. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Sorry, I just want to add also the illumination be
Lettering logo sign
only
package.
through the logo and the lettering. And you had the change about that, changing that, was it the top panel? Was that it? Was there, did you make that change?
Oh,
or
the
was that-
on the M2 sign.
So that the blank sign would
Yeah.
Match.
match or blend in and
Yeah.
not appear to be.
M2, okay.
So there's three conditions then, moving the monument sign, illumination has to be only of the letters, and the the other thing we just said. The
The-
blank space should be, should blend in with the rest of the monument sign.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Thank you.
Great. So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? So the motion passes 4-0.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda, item number 3 is Westwood Estates definitive subdivision, Hedgerow Lane, modification request related to timing, construction, phasing of the street trees and sidewalk along the new Hedgerow Lane. So if the applicant could please present.
Yes, thank you. David Johnson from Norwood Engineering, representing the applicant Canton Street Realty Trust. Also here with me tonight is Mr. David Spiegel, the trustee of the trust, to answer any questions that the board might have. To refresh your memory, we were here 2 weeks ago requesting a minor modification of one of the conditions of approval, which was to install the sidewalk and trees before the first occupancy permit is granted for a dwelling in the subdivision. At that time, the board voted 4-1 that this was not a minor modification and it was a major modification, and directed us, if we wanted to come back and request a major modification where abutters were notified of the proposed changes. Since we were here, we modified our application a little bit. If you can see on the picture up on the screen, we've extended the sidewalk, which is being proposed all the way past Lot 1, number 25 Hedgerow, which is the existing house that is under completion. That represents about 650 feet of the 1,200-foot length of the subdivision. So we're in excess of 50% of the sidewalks that are required in the subdivision. The street trees have been extended up to station 7+75, which is over 60% of the street trees that are required in the subdivision. Since the last meeting, there's been quite a bit of work done on the entrance to dress that up. This week, the granite curbing was installed. Abby, if you mind to put that picture up. Yeah, the granite curbing has brought in around the entrance of the subdivision. That's being installed up to, you can see it there as well, being brought up to that first house. Preparation of the side slopes are being loomed and seeded. Since these pictures were taken on Monday, the preparation of the swale and the sidewalks is nearing completion, and we anticipate that that first section of sidewalk would be completed in the next 10 days, and the street trees would also be installed in that time period. We're talking about, it's 18 trees on the northerly side of the road where the sidewalk is, and 23 street trees on the southerly side. The reason being, I'll just reiterate again, is that condition which was in the vote of approval to require the sidewalk and the street trees to be in at the time the binder's in, just doesn't work with construction sequencing. At this point, we're not haven't tied down where the driveway is going to be, because they're set as part of the construction of a dwelling, where depending on if the dwelling requires it to be on the right side or the left side, which would require relocation and, or damage to the sidewalk. The second part was that in order to access these sites for construction, it's just not possible many times to access through the driveway, where there's sheetrock trucks being delivered, gravel, to be damage done to the sidewalks. And the third thing I didn't mention last week that I was aware of, became aware of this week, is the gas company will not install the gas lateral to the lot until the house is under construction. So as a house is constructed, the gas company is going to go through the granite curbing, they're going to go through the swale, they're going to go through the sidewalk in order to get to the property. So it just doesn't make any sense to do that. And so we're here to ask that the board consider making a modification so that the street trees and sidewalk on the right side of the development would be completed at the completion of lots up to Lot 5, lots 2 through 5. And on the southerly side, where there is no sidewalk, the street trees would be held back until the country drainage swale is installed. That was the final point we tried to make, is that the country drainage swale, this is the first attempt in the town of Westwood to do the LID swale, and the swale comes right up to the sidewalk, and the swale can't be built except as dependent upon the sidewalk. So it's another issue that makes it difficult to comply with this sequencing. So that's why we're here. At the time, the planning board voted that it was not a minor modification. They felt that conditions couldn't be placed on the request, and that's why we're here for a major modification. And myself or Mr. Speaker would be able to answer any questions that the board has in terms of this request.
Great, thank you.
The final thing I read is that the planning board is holding, I think, close to $700,000 to complete the work in the subdivision, and I think they're holding almost $1,100 per tree to complete the street tree plantings if that were to become an issue. So there's quite a bit of funds are being held to secure the completion of the subdivision.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Abby, so do you have any board? So we met 2 weeks ago. So what is this before us tonight?
Right, so this is another minor modification request. It's slightly different than what they requested 2 weeks ago. And then since then, I also notified the abutters, so I think some of them are here tonight. But I know it's not technically a public hearing because there wasn't enough time to get the advertisement noticed in the newspaper. But if there was a concern about, I know some of you noted last time about notifying the abutters. So they have been notified for this meeting tonight.
And so nothing additional from staff?
I did give you a little more background from the 2016 approval in your packet. There was the minutes from the meeting where the planning board voted in 2016 and the peer review report at that time. There really wasn't much discussion during the public hearing on the specifics of the construction phasing, but those conditions related to when those items were installed were placed on by the planning board, but there wasn't a whole lot of discussion on the phasing of exact timing, lot by lot.
Okay. So I can just start off. So can you bring up the slide where it shows the actual, and I think the last time we met, there were two pages where we saw the different lot numbers. So what are you recommending from a staging at this point? So we have lot 1, 2, and 3. Your lot 1, I drove down the street, so I saw the two houses. So is it 1 and 9 that are being constructed?
1 and 9 are constructed.
Yeah.
So the sidewalk and the street tree plantings and the swale on the northerly side would be completed from Canton Street up to the end of Lot 1. I'm sorry. Thank you. Would be constructed from Canton Street up to the end of Lot 1, which is currently being completed.
Yeah.
On the southerly side, where Lot 9 is being completed, we would install and landscape and construct the swale from Canton Street up to the end of Lot 9.
Yeah.
So in terms of the sidewalk, this is about, I think, 52 or 53, a little over 50% of the total length of sidewalk.
So
we're
then as
not-
far as, so what are you recommending as staging? So you're saying that when would the next, when would the sidewalk be completed based on what you're?
2 through 5 would be completed at the time that lots 2, 3, 4, and 5 are complete.
So, so as 2 is done, then you build it on 2, or you
No,
wouldn't?
we would not make any sense to build 125 feet of sidewalk at one time. And I think one of the suggestions that Chris made at the time was to, as part of this hearing, rather than that the previous one where suggestions or conditions couldn't be made, was to not only allow from 2 to 5 to be done when 2 to 5 are complete, but to ensure it got complete, to put a time limit on when it would be complete if those lots were not completed. And I think Abby, in her recommendation, has come up with maybe a timeline for the completion of that. On the southerly side, there is no sidewalk, and it's simply street trees. And those trees would be planted as the construction swale is completed, because it's kind of part and parcel with getting the swale completed and planting the trees adjacent to the swale.
Just so the public can see, so which side, can you point to where the swale is going, where the drainage will be?
Yep, the dashed lines
Yep.
that you see are the country drainage swale.
Yep.
The trees that are colored in green are the trees that we're talking about planting at this time. And the trees that aren't shaded would be the ones that would be planted in the future. These would be planted once the construction of the swale takes place, and these up here would be planted as part of the sidewalk as the completion of 2 through 5.
Yeah, the staging I find challenging. One is for public safety. So if lot 4 was sold, then the sidewalk doesn't go in, so they
Right.
live without a sidewalk, and public safety is definitely an issue in all the projects that are completed in town. So that's a staging that you're recommending?
Yes.
So it seems like the first thing we voted that it was not a minor, not minor at the last meeting, so it seems like that's the trigger. We need to determine that again tonight. And so I'm done speaking for now. Does any board members want to speak?
Can I just address that? I believe we applied for a major modification in response to, I think my cover letter maybe said that.
If it, a
Because we wouldn't come
major,
back for another minor modification based upon the feedback. I think we came back for a major so that abutters can be notified, which was one of the reasons that the board voted that it wasn't a minor.
right. Unfortunately, the timing to be considered a major, it would also need the publication in the newspaper, and there just wasn't enough time because that goes in 3 weeks in advance. We just didn't have 3 weeks, so it's not technically fulfilling the full public hearing requirements of a major, which would include the newspaper advertisement.
So do we need to just
Your
move it
first,
to the next meeting? I don't want to have this hearing if we have to do it again.
no, you should, I mean, there still wouldn't be,
Because you're.
yeah, there would be enough time for a new one. Well, first you should vote, the first vote action of the planning board is if this request is minor. So a vote like you took last meeting, of whether what this applicant is requesting now, if that is in fact a major modification warranting a new public hearing.
How
I
does
mean,
that, you mentioned that you needed to put something in the paper, so I just want to make sure that we're following the appropriate procedure.
Right, so if you deny that if you do not approve this as a minor, then it would need a full public hearing. So that would need more time, a new application submission for a later meeting. I mean, I don't believe this is major in the respect to, it's not changing the overall original approval. It's not changing what was approved. It's talking about the sequencing of what was approved. So they're not requesting to remove trees or change the sidewalk. They're just talking about modifying the timing related to those conditions related to the sidewalk and the street trees.
Dave, do you have any questions?
No, I mean, I would say I'm open to reconsidering whether it was minor or not, and I know we have people who have comments and things. It'd be good to hear all that, and then we could decide on whether to proceed.
Because okay, Bill, Debbie, do you have any questions or comments?
I just think the challenge we have is that the house is being custom made, and it may take a very long time for them to sell. And we've seen what happens when that occurs. And they may be left without a sidewalk for indefinitely. I mean, we just don't know.
Can I speak as the owner?
Yeah, you can respond to that, sure.
First of all, I want to try to explain the amount of work that's been done on this project, underground, utilities, electric, Verizon, everything has been built. All the drainage for the whole subdivision is built. I spoke to the gas company last week saying, please stub on to our properties. And they said, no, we don't do it that way. So the homes that are built, that are up in the air, have gas to the homes that are there. The gas is under the street the whole way, but they wouldn't even allow us to put conduits from one side of the street to the other side. So when the swale is built, like if this is the edge of the pavement, we have a swale that's 2 feet wide that goes right here. The gas is over here. It has to go underneath it. So if we built what was originally proposed, it would get damaged or destroyed. And our intent is to sell the homes as quickly as they're built, and we want to continue to do the sidewalk and do the trees down the street as quickly as we can. But my real estate broker is here tonight, and if she sells one of the homes that you saw tomorrow, and it's complete, and the lawn is done, and the sidewalk is in front of it, I'm not allowed to convey that property to a buyer, in theory, until all 10 inside the subdivision, and I theoretically could go and put driveways in, but I might be putting them in the wrong place. But I can't get gas in, so I can't get other utilities that should be. So it's, and this, as everybody on the board realizes, this is the state's cutting edge lead technology on how to handle stormwater. So it hasn't been done in the past, and if we realized when we came originally in 2016, we would have phased it, but it's something, honestly, that we didn't think about. And it's, if it's my fault, I apologize.
Thank you. Bill?
I don't see a lot that's changed between the last meeting and this meeting, so if we thought it was major 2 weeks ago, I think it's still major today. That's my feeling. But if you want, we can hear from the public.
Yeah, anything else for the board before we go to the public?
What was the, you mentioned a timing on those, I mean, what do you think from lots 2 to 5? How far out in the future before it's done? Anybody's guess, or?
They're custom-built homes. I just would add, as major versus minor, as Abby said, there's nothing being requested here to affect frontage, location of sidewalks, waiving of any construction requirements. It's simply a sequencing thing that will, in the end, make for a better development because you're not destroying stuff that you put in. So in terms of a subdivision that's attractive, if you put the sidewalk in and then you have to go and cut through it for a driveway and gas, water, and the sidewalk is going to be unusable until that lot is completed and it can be repaved. I guess I'd have to ask David, but if the board would want, as a lot attached to that end of that sidewalk is completed, you could extend the sidewalk. But it doesn't make a lot of sense to come in with a paving company to build 125 feet of sidewalk. So I think that's my major point here, is that there's nothing here that is changing the design of the subdivision, street trees, sidewalk, nothing is being waived other than sequencing.
Now, you mentioned the gas line where they'd have to rip up the sidewalk. Can't they just dig under and then do a culvert through?
I asked,
Yeah.
I mean, ideally, what is logical is we would go.
Oh, you have to
Sorry.
go to the microphone, yeah.
What would be logical is for us, as the builder, to go and put sleeves in, like a 4-inch sleeve, so the gas company will not do that. Their regulations are, they saw cut the binder, they put the gas line in, and afterwards it gets closed up.
Anything else, Dave? Board?
No, good.
Okay, so it's time for a public,
Once again, Dave Canole, 485 Canton Street. I'm a direct abutter of 25 Hedgerow Lane, Assessors Map 3200, Lot 009. I didn't get notification. I don't know why, but I can tell you this. This is why you need a public hearing. This is why it's a major modification. Not only that, there's court cases that even if you are voting to approve this, by not having the public hearing, it's going to get voided. So I'd say save your breath. I asked for a public hearing. I said the remedy last 2 weeks ago was a public hearing. The remedy should have been, if they thought it was a major modification, apply to the planning board, schedule a public hearing, notification goes out twice in the newspaper, all the abutters get notified, including the town of Norwood. Maybe the Bicycle and Pedestrian Safety Committee gets notified because it involves sidewalks. I think along the way, the Board of Health has to get notified as well. The statute where you're governed by, Chapter 4181W and Chapter 4181T, says that if there's a modification, you have to go through the whole process as if you were approving the definitive subdivision from the beginning. The purpose of that is so that you don't have meetings like this, that everyone gets notified, everyone sees it in the newspaper, and there's nothing out of the, quote-unquote, dark room. Now, I'm sure there are abutters here that got notified, and I'd be interested to hear what they had to say, but obviously, no official action can take place. You need a public hearing. I can cite you Strand versus Planning Board of Sudbury, which says, modification of subdivision approval requires notice and public hearing, even if the modification is on remand from the court. So even if and that's an appellate court decision. So even if you get a judicial, Superior Court says you have to do this to the planning board can't do it until they have a public hearing. So the importance of a public hearing is paramount here. And that's the process you should go. And if you want to listen to the people, that's fine, because I'm sure they're going to have plenty to say. And I think it's a waste of effort if they made the effort to come here. They should have something to say. So thank you very much, and please, please, this is a major modification. Treat it as a major modification, and then do the process of a public hearing. Everyone else, if I made an appeal, I don't get special treatment. I don't get 2 weeks' notice, right? I can't come in here and say I want a public hearing, or I want a modification, and within 2 weeks. He made the request September 12th. What are we now, September 17th? 5 days? It's unfair. It's unfair to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else from the public who would like to speak? It's the podium and the microphone. Thank you.
Steve Olenoff, Associate Member of the Planning Board. Let me give you a little history and intent here. In the past, we've had subdivisions where it wasn't required to do the sidewalks and the trees until the last thing, until the final layer of the roadway was done. And what happened was that quite often those sidewalks were ignored. People's lawns were graded to the street as though sidewalk wasn't going to be there. Driveways were paved right to the street as though a sidewalk wouldn't be there. And so there was a problem. So we just decided to change that and insist that the sidewalks be built as the road goes. And earlier on, before the final pavement is put down, and so that wouldn't happen. I think we've made the point here that, you know, you've got to put in these sidewalks correctly, and you got to plan for them. And I don't think we anticipated the problem with the gas company. Getting utilities to do what a town needs is a problem. It's a major problem all over the state. Utilities just seem to do what they want to do and don't pay any attention to what they should be doing. So obviously, as the builder has asked, them to cooperate and put in lines under the road so those things don't have to get ripped up and they just won't do it. So that's a problem I don't think was anticipated. So nothing is changing here, it's just the timing of this. And obviously the timing didn't work as planned, and so I think you should be flexible in granting the timing. What you want to avoid is a subdivision where the developer takes their time and there are some lots left vacant for maybe years until they get around to building houses. That's happened in the past. So you don't want to have to wait for those sidewalks to be done. I don't think that's the case here, so he's moving right along. So I think you can structure it so that require the sidewalks to be built as the houses are built, but after everything else is in place, and you won't be ripping up brand new sidewalks and things like that. It just but you just always make sure there's plenty of money left over in that he owes, so that things can be done, and he has the incentive to complete these things. But I think in this case it seems pretty obvious that he intends to do that.
Sure. Thank you, Steve. Anything else from the public? Sure.
Yes, my name's John Shang. I'm a butter at 6 Hedgerow Lane. And I can tell you that, knowing Mr. Spiegel, he's explained, to me about everything. And I know he's addressed a lot of my concerns about the whole project since, this is, started, a few years ago. Okay. And I see the man, going up to the work site, every day, overseeing, the project and everything, because he's there every day, looking things over, making sure things are, done, correctly. And I think that shows that, he's attentive and is committed, to the project, And so I believe that, I think he will accomplish what, he wants, to get the sidewalks done. And put the trees in with the situation that's happening, and going forward, because I think he's, like I say, he's committed to the project, and I think he's doing a good job.
Right.
Yeah, so I have perfect faith in what he's doing, because he's helped me a lot.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Sure. And you can just queue up in line. You can speak right after.
Obviously, I live near the site. I walked the site today. I wonder what the argument is for Lot 10. Lot 10 has the curbing in front of it today. So why is Lot 10, are you going to, right here, you're showing Lot 10. right here, you're putting trees in. This house is built, nothing's on lot 10. So why is lot 10 special? Is there gas going through lot 10? What's the explanation?
The explanation is we tried to make it continuous, as the board requested, up to service Lot 9. And we didn't want to leave a gap. We can certainly leave a gap if the board so chooses, but that was the basis, rather than leaving a gap there, that one of the lots we could work around. But to work around 8 additional lots was an issue, number one, and number two, there's no sidewalk on that side. So it would be easier to address the driveway without, with the pieces of granite curbing, and rather than have to deal with the sidewalk construction as well. Finally, I don't think that the intent of the subdivision control law in terms of modification really applies to sequencing. I think it applies to the subdivision itself, changing the layout, adding streets to the layout, eliminating things from the actual subdivision plan. Where we're not requesting any change to the plan, I don't believe that section of the subdivision control law applies in this particular case.
Thank you. So did you need to speak?
Yes, I have some comments. And my name is Sang Yao Nong, and I think I'm a butter because if you go to maybe not this slide, the next one, I am at 88 Lions Drive, which is I think is somewhere here. So I understand if you don't do any sidewalk or plant any trees, for this empty lot. So what's the harm if you plant a tree over there? Say the end of this cul-de-sac, also around the emergency drive.
David,
Oh.
I want to install.
Let me just grab the mic, yeah.
I want to install all of the trees at the emergency drive at the same time that I install at the beginning of the roadway. We anticipate that work would be complete within 30 days. The sidewalk has been shaped probably around 300 or 400 feet today. The balance of it will be done within a week, and it will be, as long as the engineers approve it, it will be paved, and all those trees can be installed. So we would install trees at both ends of the property.
Are you saying that you're going to put the sidewalk around the cul-de-sac now, or
The trees.
We're going to do the
Just-
emergency access.
just, so you complete the emergency access now?
Emergency access is complete now, with guardrail fencing, and the only thing remaining on that are the trees, which will be done, as David indicated, within that time period.
Oh, you just,
Sorry,
thank you.
do I have to repeat that?
Please, yeah, it was quick anyway. Yeah.
The emergency access is complete. The guardrail, fencing around it, the fence along this gentleman's property has been installed. The only thing left to do on that is to plant the trees along the fence that were approved by the board. And as David indicated, that would be done within that time period when the other street trees are planted up front along the entrance road.
Sure. Okay, great. Any other public comments? Okay, seeing none. I think my final comment is just that I would like there to be transparency. The intent was, following the last vote, that it was determined to not be minor, to have a public hearing. I think the attempt was done. I think the applicant intended on it being that application. So I don't see anything that's changed here. To me, this seems major to me, especially considering the sequencing can be severe, such that you're waiting till that last lot. And that's all I have to say at this point. Any other final words?
Yeah, but what are the, I guess it feels to me like we have a notice problem that, and that was clear from the last meeting, was that if we thought it was major, there was a process. So why not, did we just need an extra week or something? Did they just need to?
It's about a month, because you have to, for it to be a public hearing, it needs to be about a month in advance. So there was not enough time for an official public hearing because of the newspaper. It requires at least 14 days in advance.
But I mean, there
However,
could have been a hearing, at our next meeting or something, or in November or something
Right,
like that.
but
We could have-
because the applicant was working with the time frame, trying to close on the first property, he wanted to come back and try again with the revised proposal. It was noted last time that you wanted to notify the abutters, so we took that approach and sent out a mailing right after your last meeting about this meeting. So the abutter mailing was mailed, but it did not get into the newspaper for an official public hearing.
Can I respond quickly?
Sure.
Given that all of this work is within the subdivision, I'm not sure what public notice to people 300 feet away really has to do with what the planning board needs to decide. It's not we're changing the intersection. It's all within the development, and I'm not sure what purpose running an ad in the newspaper is going to have beyond what's transpired here with the notification to the abutters.
I think a lot of it's policy and procedure.
It's legal, it's the law.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm torn on this because I think on the substantive details of this, it sounds very reasonable. But the problem we have is that the process of kind of coming back and not having the complete notice of things, it is a problem in general. Maybe not in this particular case, the details, but with the fact that we've had 2 hearings on it and we've had a lot of discussion and all, I think to me that, again, it raises this idea of like, this is not a trivial thing here. So it's, moving forward, it needs to follow the process.
One of the issues, we have a buyer that's interested in purchasing one of the homes, wants to be able to be in October, and if this gets delayed, we're not able to do that. Although, whatever happens at this meeting, I'm still going to be paving in the next 10 days, half of the subdivision, and I will be installing the trees at one end and the other end. And this is the first lead design project like this that the town has had. So I would appreciate if you could try to be a little flexible. We are not modifying anything except to do it in a timely fashion. I want to build all the homes and have the sidewalk done as quickly as possible. I mean, this has been a huge amount of work to get this project built to the point that it is.
Thank you. Yeah, Dave, I echo your sentiments. I would like there to be the fact that we're hearing from an abutter that has stated that he hasn't received notification. That concerns me. And I'm not so sure if the sequencing is to wait till 5 is done. I'm not sure if that's the right way to go either.
We would continue to do the swale as we build the homes down the street, and we would continue the sidewalk as we go down the street.
I would like to hear from the residents. That notifications have gone out appropriately to residents and they've been notified. I feel for the timing of that. I think it's, you're trying to move these along, and I really feel for that, truly.
Abby, how were the notifications sent? By regular mail, certified mail?
By regular mail. I just don't have the full list with me tonight to double check, but they were mailed, I think, on the same week as your last hearing.
So the gentleman who spoke earlier, so what is your concern with this? So you're in a butter. The last time you had said, why didn't you complete through to Lot 1? They agreed to do that. So what is...
First of all, my concern is it's done the right way, right? It's done the legal way. That's my biggest concern. I have another concern as well, as the board kind of hinted at last meeting. You get 2 houses in the subdivision completed. If they sell and the others don't sell, this subdivision is going to go on and on and on. There's going to be rusted trucks. There's going to be dirt. There's going to be everything there. What you usually do in a subdivision, they haven't even cleared the trees for the other lots. What you usually do in a subdivision is you clear all the trees, you get all your lots all set up, you know where your driveways are going to go. It's not an issue. What they're doing is they're building piece by piece by piece, lot by lot by lot. And I would say, just in my opinion, that Lot 5 is probably going to be the last lot to get sold, because all the water is going to go down that way, right? I know they're going to have proper drainage and everything like that, but it's just kind of low. It's not in the greatest location, and looking out, you don't have the greatest view. So I think that's the key, what they're saying, Lot 5. So I know what they do in other locations. They do put the sidewalk in once the house. It's extra work probably, but they do put the sidewalk in. And then all they do is they meet up once if they had 2, sold 2, they put a sidewalk on 2. They sell 4, they put the sidewalk on 4. And then if they sell 3, you join them together. It's no big deal. But the bottom line is, no matter, the courts do not care whether you have a buyer for a house. The courts care that it has proper notice, that there's a public hearing, that everyone gets notified. That's what the courts are concerned about, that everyone knows. And that's my concern. That's my major concern. I think the longer this goes, the longer they're doing the work. The past 2 weeks, there's been more activity there than there had been in the last 2 years, as far as making it look decent. So I say, you are holding the cards. Don't give up the cards. You're holding the cards. You can get this project completed the way that you want it completed, but please don't give up the cards. Especially don't give up the cards without hearing from everyone. You can make a determination. I would say if you vote after a public hearing to allow him to do it, that's fine. Everyone got notified. But I know you voiced concerns. I know you voiced concerns about the timing. And as I mentioned last time, 2 years. This has gone on for 2 years. The pavement was done. I look back. The binder coat was put down like last November. So it's almost a year that the binder coat was down. So, I mean,
Yeah, your points are well made.
yeah, I know it's hard to sell these houses at the price in that area, but, you know, as I said before, the courts don't care whether you can sell the house or not, but I mean, I think it's, for the neighborhood, I think it's only fitting that you try to get the subdivision built sooner rather than later. And I would say, and I think one of the fears too is if you have an economic downturn, you're not going to be able to sell a large house that's there. So that's only speculation on my part. But the sooner you get it done, I think the better off for everyone. So thank you.
Thanks. Sure you can speak.
I just want to explain, the approvals that we got only allow us to clear the trees as we go and develop each lot. It's much easier for me to clear all the trees for all the lots. That's not the approvals that we got. So as we come up with a plan, we notify the board or notify Abby Then we clear those trees and we build each home one at a time. I have you have financial backing that the whole project will be done 100% as far as all the infrastructure. It's not a matter of stalling, and Abby knows very well the amount of time that it took before we were able to pull a building permit. Because we did not have street numbers, the town would not allow us to get a building permit. The delays are not, it's not because I don't want to build the homes. And Lot 5, I mean, there's not a specific lot that I'm not trying to play a game that we're not going to do Lot 5 because of such and such. It's not remotely the case. If you prefer all the homes on the right side to be built so that the sidewalk can be done quicker, I'll do it that way. I'm not trying to do anything.
Thank you. Yeah, my issue is just the public hearing part of it. I think it's, so,
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question? If this was a full public hearing, do you think you're going to hear new information that you're not hearing tonight? And how would that change this outcome? If that's what you want, you should give the applicant guidance on what they would come back with. Is there something new that might come out of notifying in the newspaper that someone on the other side of town might see?
I mean, I won't know. I'd be speculating.
Generally, the timing of the street trees does not change the overall approved plan that you approved. That would require a full public hearing.
I'd be more comfortable with the hearing. I wish it had gone out before. Like you said, we would have been on top of it more.
And that's kind of like, what I was saying is, I think if it came to us now in this form, I would probably be comfortable with this. But the problem is the procedure. And I feel like we were clear at the last meeting that that's kind of what tipped it over into not being, that we wanted that additional level. I think that notifying individual residents of things, I mean, there's always a lot of people who didn't get the notice, or how do you decide which ones? Like, we need to start having that more formal process of making sure that we reach out to everybody. I don't know what would the additional information be. We got some additional information tonight, which was about the gas lines, which actually, mitigates toward making a different decision now. But I don't know. It's the process. It's the process. And as long as we sort of say, oh, okay, no problem, we'll work with you. I mean, we want to work with people, but it's always going to turn into, well, if we didn't notify people appropriately before we make a decision, we're going to run into problems that, we didn't dot all our I's and cross our T's.
Yeah, I echo the same sentiment.
There's a gentleman in the back that wanted to.
You're gonna have to go to the microphone, just so that. Thank you for doing that.
My name is Dale Bach. I'm at 501 Canton Street. So I'm right, the whole development's right behind me. And, it's been a long time, and this guy's worked very, very diligently to get this done. And I'm not a construction guy, but I can tell you that this seems very technical, and I think everybody that seems to be here or closer, close to the area is here. And so I don't think a public hearing would really make a difference because it's such a technical thing. That's, and I don't see how it's really going to make a big change on anything. All it's trying to do is just smooth the path to get this thing completed. So, I just hate to see this thing delayed any longer.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't think that was our intent 2 weeks ago, was to move it along.
Right. I think you have someone on the.
You can speak. Steve Oliver.
So I'm not going to address the notification issue, but the real objective of the planning board is to make sure that this is done in a timely manner so that there aren't vacant lots left there with, and that's the reason why the final coating isn't put on, the sidewalks aren't done and everything. So I think you should accept, you can accept a schedule that allows them to do it in sections, but you should still put a final date by which, if he hasn't sold the houses and completed everything, then he has to complete all the sidewalks, all the trees. And then you can always move that date if he's making a lot of progress but not quite enough, and you can adjust that later. But whatever you decide, you should put that final date on.
Yeah, point well made. We spoke about that at the last meeting. Thanks, Steve.
I mean, with our concern was that the purpose of this was to guarantee that things got done. The thing that made it not a minor modification was that this would remove that protection, I think. So, I mean, I don't know, does Steve's suggestion allow anyone to, would that help us to think that it was a minor modification, or no? What would that would be like saying, if it's, you have like 1 year to complete this, or 2 years to complete it, and if not, you have to immediately put in the sidewalks? Is that the kind of, Steve, is that what you were saying, like to have a condition where, say, 1 year from now, if it's not done, they have to at that time do the sidewalks and do the trees and everything, so back to where we are now?
But they'll be in the same boat if they don't, if they put the sidewalks in a year from now and they still haven't sold the other lots. They're still gonna have to dig up the sidewalks again if those lots do sell. So we're right back to where we started, in a sense. I don't know.
So were you saying that for the sequencing, you would do, as the lots were sold, you would, you wouldn't wait till Lot 5 is, so at the screen we're looking at, so Lot 2 is already done, that will be done. So if Lot 3 gets sold, are you going to put in the sidewalks?
Build the house, get the gas line
Yeah.
in, put the street in, build the home, loom the front,
Yeah.
sod it, I'll put the sidewalk in, and we'll connect the sidewalks as we go. It is not, if that's what the board would like, it's not a problem for me.
Yeah. And then what about, and then likewise, and as 4 is sold, then you,
He needs a microphone.
down the, so he answered yes to both of those. Because the gas line, to me, is a problem. The fact that you'd have to rip up the sidewalk. That's a new factoid for tonight.
After the feedback from the last hearing that you had, I immediately contacted the gas company, because I already have the money set aside to do the whole project.
Yeah.
So if I could do what you want, I'd be ecstatic to.
Right.
So I called them and begged them every way, please, I'll put sleeves, I'll do this. They said, no, this isn't how we do it. The other thing that's a little crazy, the gas line's on one side of the street. Every time a home gets built, if it's on that side, they connect to it. The other side, they jackhammer the street, and they go across.
No, I hear you. Abby, when is our next meeting?
October 22nd. Oh, no, sorry, October 1st, but, I mean, that wouldn't be enough time for a public hearing.
But is it, I'm just trying to get creative here. If we sent out a notification to abutters and made sure it got there, and then we had continued this to the next meeting on the first week of October.
You can't do it. You gotta do the 4181 W, 4181T.
Well, the thing that triggers everything is our finding that
Yes,
it was
it's-
not a minor modification. If we found that this was a minor modification, then it doesn't trigger the notice requirements.
Right.
And it was major 2 weeks ago. On record.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Atkins is correct, in my opinion. You made a finding 2 weeks ago that it was a major modification. You'd have to find tonight and justify that it's a minor modification if you wanted to move on it tonight or even at the next meeting.
Do the board members have any?
No, we have to go by what we said
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, so.
Let's make a motion. I mean, I don't have anything else. Dave?
No, I think that's, yeah, either way, we get ourselves in this back and forth thing, we have
We
to
do.
justify. We made a finding, and there is some new information, maybe it changes things, but maybe not enough. And the concerns remain about following the correct process.
Agreed. Yeah, it's the same for me as before.
I think you should still make a motion about this updated request.
As
If
2
it's
weeks
a,
ago.
if it is or is not a minor modification.
Well, we said that 2 weeks ago. I think you have to,
Right, well, you got an updated request. I think you should revote on, make a new motion on the more recent request as well. Because they submitted a revised proposal.
So we could just, since this is a meeting, it's not like a formal, we approve, we disapprove, but we could make a motion that we instruct the applicant to follow the process for a public hearing. We have determined that this is a major modification and that they should follow the process to a public hearing. Right, is that the right wording? Or?
Right, or I'm just looking at Pat, or your motion could be that the applicant's September 12th request is not minor and requires a full public hearing.
I believe Abby's correct in her assessment.
Do you wanna make that
So
motion?
I move that, having reviewed the additional information tonight, this board has determined that there's not sufficient information to overturn our previous decision that this was not a minor modification, and we therefore direct the applicant to apply for a major modification.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
second.
We have a motion, a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All those opposed? Any abstentions? So it's 4-0. Thank you. Okay, next on the agenda is an update and review of Gay Street sidewalk design plans. Thanks, Pat.
All right. Good evening, members of the board. Mike Myers, Jake Carmody from TEC. It's been about a year since we were here in front of the board to give an update on the Gay Street project. That was about 30% stage. We are currently at 75% stage. Here to give you an update again as we prepare for our last public informational meeting later this fall, thinking potentially November. So as you know, it's a challenging project. It's been a lot of fun for us. We've had two primary goals along the way, trying to balance creating a safe pedestrian space where there isn't one today, and preserving the character of Gay Street. The sidewalk that's proposed today it's a standard 5 foot wide. It's consistent. 5 feet wide is standard because it allows two people to walk side by side. In particular, you know, kids are out there. It's something you definitely want. cement concrete material. We're working with a landscape architect right now to look at some potential dyes to soften the color a little bit. And then the last major component is the buffer that's out there. Obviously challenges with getting a buffer out there because of the tight corridor that's out there today. And when I refer to a buffer, we stick with we typically stick with a minimum 3 foot wide natural buffer, so like a grass, because anything less than 3 feet, you're gonna have a difficult time establishing and retaining it. So we provided some summary notes. So just to kind of touch on those real quick, the sidewalk areas where we have a 3 foot wide minimum buffer, almost 1,000 feet, about 850. And then in addition, some of the feedback we heard at the last meeting, as well as through our public meetings, was to evaluate an opportunity to go behind the stone wall onto private property. There were 35 properties along the north side of Gay Street. We took a look at each property and we looked at 3 major components: the locations of the houses, wetlands, and slopes, whether the slopes fell off the road or went up along the side of the road. After we looked at all 35 of those properties, we found 13 that were feasible. Todd and DPW contacted all 13 property owners. We found there were 3 properties where they were amenable to putting the sidewalk behind the stone wall on private property and potentially granting a permanent easement to the town. That total is about 1,200 feet. So the sidewalk, the entire length is about 8,500 feet. We're looking at about 2,000 feet with established buffers that are out there that are currently proposed. That being said, I think as we all admire and respect the character and the challenges that fall within Gay Street, 25% with a minimum 3 foot wide buffer is pretty substantial. So with that, what I'll do is I'll have Jake quickly walk you through the plans that we submitted.
I just have one quick question. When you talk about that 25%, does that include going on to the other side of the walls on the road?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So that
basically
previously
850 feet where we have more or less a 3 foot wide grass buffer
Yeah.
where the sidewalk is within the right of way. Then there's another 1,200 feet where the sidewalk goes onto private property and would have the sidewalk plus some grass space. So 1,200 behind the wall, 850 was a 3 foot grass buffer. A total of what we're calling an established buffer would be about 2,000 feet. Okay. We have the plans that we submitted. They've been colored up to really show where we have a buffer, where we don't. You can see the right-of-way lines. We're trying to draw attention to where the houses are located, the wetlands, so you can see the general layout of the sidewalk. And I'll have Jake briefly walk you through those.
So you can see on the plan, the sidewalk that's highlighted in blue is the sections of sidewalk that are immediately adjacent to the roadway. And we highlighted the sidewalk that has a buffer. We highlighted that in pink or magenta, with the right-of-way there shown in orange. This first sheet is the section of sidewalk on Gay Street, just east of High Street. You can see the sidewalk runs along the north side of Gay Street within the project limits. In the first section, there's not enough room between the roadway and the right-of-way to provide a buffer, so the sidewalk runs along the roadway that first few hundred feet, and then we're able to provide a grass buffer, which is similar to there's a grass buffer in this section today.
Do you want me to?
Yes, please. Okay. There's a grass buffer extending up to Deerfield Ave. After Deerfield Ave, the right-of-way is either very tight or there's wetlands along the edge of the right-of-way for about 2,000 feet. So with the exception of these first 2 properties, after these first 2, we go with, Abby, if you wouldn't mind going to the next. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. Does this work?
Yes, I
All right,
think.
yes.
Well, do you want to skip it a try?
Yeah, give it a
See if
try.
works? Yes, okay, it does.
All right, we're in business. So after Deerfield, these first 2 properties next to Deerfield, we have wetlands for about 2,000, or 1,000 feet along this street, this entire sheet here. We have wetlands along both sides of Gay Street here. It's a very constrained corridor. So we put the sidewalk immediately adjacent to the road with a granite curb. So the sidewalk will be elevated 6 inches from the travelway. What's not shown on the sheet is the pavement markings. The section of pavement markings we're showing 2 10-foot travel lanes and a 2-foot stripe marked shoulder.
So you're saying all right, now it works. So are you saying that there's, so you got the wetlands, so you don't have room to move the sidewalk any further back? The stone wall there is not going to be touched at all, and then you have 2 feet of shoulder before you get to the 10-foot travel lane. So it's saying there's like 2 feet of between the white line and the granite curb?
Yes, correct. Yeah. Yep. And it's a 10-foot travel lane. So the 2 feet's a minimum recommended for design guidance for a striped shoulder.
So at least in that section, the curb is not directly against. I mean,
Yeah, the entire corridor we have 10-foot travel lanes and 2-foot shoulders for the entire corridor is what we're proposing. And then this section here, the wetlands continue along both sides of Gay Street. This is, let's see here. Yeah, then at 142 Gay Street, there's a tight slope, and the right-of-way is very narrow against the road here. So we continued the sidewalk adjacent to the roadway up until Fox Hill Street, where again there's some wetlands before Fox Hill. After Fox Hill, we're able to put the sidewalk behind the wall, and we run the sidewalk behind the wall for about 800 feet up until Thatcher, across the street from Thatcher Street. So it will be behind the wall for that entire section. That sidewalk along there wouldn't be concrete. That would typically be an asphalt surface. When the sidewalk is separated that far from the road, it'd be more of a pathway.
Yeah, that gets pretty wet in there also, so if you go to the previous. Yeah, so right in there when you go behind the wall, did you take that in consideration? So you're gonna raise it, I would imagine?
Yeah, we would put an appropriate base, gravel base that would be free draining, and then the pavement would be on top of that.
That's good.
Yeah, and that's right, there's wetlands along in here. Which is really something that's limiting once we get up to Thatcher Street. Behind the retaining wall, we're introduced to wetlands again. So the sidewalk comes back onto the street side of the wall and runs along the roadway here. You can see on some of the sheets we're proposing some drainage infrastructure. Because of the sidewalk being installed with a granite curb, we're trapping any water that lands in the roadway. So we need to collect that water and convey it to outlets. Today, there's no granite curb, so the water that lands in the roadway just drains off the edge of the road wherever it lands. So the sidewalk continues along the roadway because of the tight right-of-way and the wetland impacts. I'm sorry, the wetland proximity to the project up to Sandy Valley Road. The right-of-way widens at Sandy Valley Road, so we were able to provide a buffer between the sidewalk and the roadway in this section. As we get closer to Milk Street, we're constrained by some slope impacts, and you can see here about right in the middle of the sheet where there's a jog in Gay Street that we're trying to straighten out with the project and make more of a uniform travelway and a better approach to Milk Street. It will improve sight lines for Milk Street and for vehicles approaching Milk Street. On the corner here, maybe it shows better on this sheet, you can see Purgatory Brook on the left side of the page, where there's an existing retaining wall on the north side of Gay Street here that is, it needs to be replaced. And we're proposing to replace that wall. It's about a 10-foot tall retaining wall that would be behind the sidewalk. So that, as part of this project, we would need to replace that wall so that we could fit the sidewalk in next to Gay Street.
And would you widen that or just keep it at the same spot? That wall?
We would have to keep it at the same spot where there's wetlands on both sides. Basically, the bottom of the wall is the wetlands, and it's all wet on both sides of the roadway. So we would have to really just keep it in the same spot. After we get across Purgatory Brook, we had an opportunity to put the sidewalk behind a wall, so we run that across this property, and then come back down onto the street side of the wall after this property. From here, there's several slope impacts and retaining wall impacts that we are trying to avoid, especially on this corner here, where the landscape architect that we're working with recommended that. So just to orient you, this is a dry-laid stone retaining wall that's adjacent to the roadway. It's not just a rock pile wall that you see in a lot of spots. This is actually retaining about 3.5 to 4 feet of earth. So if we were to try to push this, even though there's a lot of right-of-way, if we were to start pushing the sidewalk back, we're into impacting that natural, that aesthetically pleasing corridor that we're trying to preserve.
Yeah.
So rather than pushing into the right-of-way here, we're keeping the sidewalk adjacent to the roadway. Coming around that curve, there's a steep slope next to the road, and we have to build a retaining wall right along the middle of this sheet. That would be a stone retaining wall, and we'll work on specifications so that it doesn't look too mass-produced or too much like a state spec. We'll work on specifications that would require that any mortar not be visible or be set back. It's a common to try to improve the aesthetics of the wall. And coming around this curve, there's actually the slope downwards from the road. So we have some guardrail behind the sidewalk and some stone fill, stone riprap just to preserve the slope here. And as we approach Pine Lane, there's actually a ledge coming up from the road that we would have to cut into. So any additional widening there to put a buffer would be very expensive. And across from Pine Lane, this is where we're tying into the existing sidewalk. As part of the project, we'll also be upgrading or resurfacing the pavement because it'll be impacted by the drainage installation and the curb installation and the new pavement marking locations. With that,
So on these plans, all the whole distance, it says proposed 5.5 foot. Is
Yeah.
that? So we're looking at
Yep.
5.5 feet of concrete.
yeah, well, so we propose a sidewalk width. We always measure it from the face of curb, just because granite curb can vary slightly. The contractor is required to put 5.5 feet measured from the face of the curb. So it accounts for the top of that granite curb, which is considered non-traversable. That way, we're always providing a 5-foot width of concrete next to.
There's part of that includes the granite.
Yeah, it
basically.
includes the granite, yeah.
And then you said you have 2 feet to the fog line.
Yes, yes.
Is there anything you can do? I'm concerned, I want this, I want to find a way to keep this as safe as possible. And, is there anything you can do on that granite curb or something to create a barrier there? Like, does it have to be, what if the sidewalk were a little narrower, and what if you had bollards or a railing or something like that? Is there anything like that you could do?
I think I spoke to in the beginning was what we've looked at as a natural buffer to maintain the aesthetics of Gay Street, and traditionally that's a 3-foot minimum. The challenge with bollards and reflectors and things of that nature, yes, they may be safer, but now we're compromising the aesthetics. It also can be an issue with maintenance and snow removal with DPW. But we can certainly look at some of those things, but those would be detailed specifications that we'd look at when the contract goes to bid and we put those specifications together. Right now, we're just charged with getting across the finish line to the final design, and that's what we're hoping to accomplish in the next couple months. But something like that would be more of a detailed specification when the contractor goes, when the plan goes to bid.
Has the width of the street been compromised at all?
Is the width of the street?
Yeah.
Based on today?
Based on,
more or less
yes.
Yeah, it's going to be roughly the same, in some areas maybe a little less. And the reason for that is to get the consistent cross-section of the road, go to 10-foot lanes with 2-foot shoulders, the little vertical 6-inch curb. All of that should hopefully provide some traffic calming along Gay Street. The lane, yes, the lane width itself, the width of the road will be generally about the same.
I have two questions. One is for the wall, if you have to do it, will any of the walls be moved? Is this part of the, and then will you use the existing material, so the existing stones?
Yep.
So just shifting it over?
That's a good question. So one of the reasons for bringing on the landscape architect is they have that's a specialized field that they work in. The idea would be to reuse the stones that exist today. Relocation, we're only looking at about 500 feet where the wall would actually be moved horizontally on plan. There are some areas where we would look to more or less rebalance the wall in place. The reason for that is you go up 6 inches with the curb, then you come across, and as you fill in, you would more or less fill that wall. So you need to kind of pick it up a little bit.
And then my other question is for tree removal. As some of the trees are taken down, especially as you're approaching going from 109 to Washington, there's some nice trees there. So if any of those are removed, is the intention to plant at least one to one, or? Absolutely.
We're working with a certified tree arborist as well as our landscape architect to assess all the trees in detail and then mitigate, any removals at least at a 1-to-1.
Okay. And that's all.
Do we have any idea how much this is going to cost?
Upwards of $4 million right now. This is the full project cost.
Now, I also have an understanding that one of the residents that lives along there is going to fight us legally. Do we have anything, do we know anything about that?
No. I don't.
Throughout the whole process over the past couple of years, we've obviously met with several of the abutters, and there are some that are obviously opposed to the project, and you might be alluding to one or two of them. But as far as any legal legitimacy that they might have regarding this project, we haven't heard anything that makes us think as a town that we're in jeopardy by any means. So,
At one of the meetings, one of the abutters did say that he would stop this project, and I think he has the means to do it. So I'm not sure that. And that's why I was just wondering if we.
And we're doing everything within the means of this design. TEC has done a tremendous job as far as keeping everything within our right-of-way, within those certain locations, to not push any legal matters or potential legal matters. But
okay. But right now, you think the project is going to run about $4 million?
I'm aware of no formal legal notice that we've received regarding this project.
Okay.
Thank you.
So will the land behind the walls be an easement, or will it be the town's?
I'm sorry, what was that?
The land behind the wall that will be the sidewalk, will that be the town-owned, or will that just be an easement? Or how will
That would require a permanent easement
Okay.
to give the public the right to pass on that, over that sidewalk.
And Todd, this is probably a question for you. Are those going to be plowed out during the winter?
Yes.
This project, if and when it comes to fruition constructually, will become part of our primary snow removal sidewalk routes. So,
Is this and this is funded by the town?
as of right now, we're still exploring the potential for the state to
But
possibly
presently,
contribute it
it's
to
still
some
just-
degree. There's been no commitment by the town to fund this whatsoever. Our task right now at hand, which has totally been funded, was for the design only. It's our goal and objective after this meeting tonight to then host another public hearing with all of the abutters in the community host and present our final design to those who have been involved for upwards to 2 years plus. And then after that meeting, we're going to then bring the final design to the select board and ultimately let them have, I mean, they're the road commissioners, let them have the final say. If the design is approved, it again becomes a select board decision as to, are we going to pursue this? Would they like to pursue this at a town meeting level, or would they like us to keep pursuing it potentially from the state funding perspective? So.
Thanks, Todd.
One thing that got raised at some of the meetings was the idea that state funding would only be possible for a fully accessible pathway, which would have bike accommodations and all. And I know that you had to make a choice in this design as to whether to go that way or not. And could you just address that briefly? Or
completely correct and accurate. That we've had several conversations with the state, in as of I believe November or October the past year, that they informed us. We're at that point where we either go all in and jeopardize the pure aesthetics of Gay Street, and obviously a lot of the abutters at that point would be very much opposed, or we take a step back and say, let's be patient, perhaps the state comes in with another funding mechanism at some point in time, and or the town wants to fund the project. I mean, we're kind of at that point, but still the focus tonight, and for the next couple of months is just finalize the design and then have the select board weigh in and see if the design becomes something that's not technically tabled, but provides us an opportunity to sit and see if there are other opportunities from the state to fund the project, or again, if the town wants to do so in the future. So.
Does anybody from the public wish to ask any questions? Sure, just grab the microphone.
Steve Olenoff, Vice Chair of the Pedestrian and Bicycle Safety Committee. I was happy to hear that there will be places where there's like a 3-foot grass strip, but it didn't look like it was very much on the plans. How many feet is that? What?
850.
850.
850 plus the 1,200 where it goes.
Okay. I mean, we like to get as much of that as possible. Over the whole length of the project, it didn't look like there'd be enough of that to really make it feel safe for pedestrians to be walking there. My suggestion has been any places where, well, first of all, between Thatcher Street and on down towards Islington, where you have the wetlands problems there, it'd be nice to continue the walk behind the stone wall. And even if you had to move the stone wall closer to the street, then you would be avoiding the wetlands and you have the path behind the stone wall. My suggestion is, in some places, particularly in those places where you have to move the stone wall, you're moving a stone wall, it doesn't cost any more to move it 1 foot or to move it 5 feet. It's the exact same cost. If you have to raise it, again, why don't you raise it and move it next to the roadway, and then you have the sidewalk behind the stone wall. Then you have the aesthetics maintained. You have the pedestrians feel comfortable walking there because they have a stone wall between them. And I think there are more places where you should be doing that and trying to get as many places behind the stone wall. When you have some neighbors that say, okay, we can go behind the stone wall, and then you get some that don't, well, then maybe that's the place to move the stone wall forward towards the street, so you can keep that sidewalk behind the stone wall just as much as you can. I've seen places now, I've been watching, where they have these old roads like this, and there's a sidewalk along it. They actually had and it wasn't really a guardrail, but it was a wooden rail. It was probably by 4x4s, and with posts, and the horizontal beam is directly on top of it, so it doesn't look like an ordinary guardrail. It looks more like a fence kind of thing, to give the pedestrians a real sense of security there. I mean, obviously, it's not a real guardrail, so it's not going to hold the cars back the way a real guardrail would. But it would act as a traffic calming measure when the cars see that, and give them pedestrians a lot more sense of security doing that. So I think there's a lot more we can do to make this more pedestrian friendly. So I'll ask you to consider getting more of this behind the wall. If you moving the wall, it would be, to me, is a easy way of doing it. And of course, we want to avoid as much curving as you can, because that gets expensive. As soon as you go to put the curving in, then you have to put in storm drains, and then you have to have the pipes, and then you have to have someplace to go, and then you have the water quality issues, so you have to have a detention basin. So I would consider alternate means of, individually going under the sidewalk and getting out of swales. So I think we can try to keep the cost down, but keep the pedestrians safe with that stone wall between them and the
Is there a way
traffic.
for you to take those notes?
Yeah.
Because it sounds like those are, okay, you can go.
No, I think what Steve brings up is an excellent point. At the early stages of our public outreach, one of the first and primary things we heard not to touch was the stone walls. So to move the stone walls was something we weren't able to do. So we're more or less designing around the stone walls to try and limit the impacts to those stone walls. In a lot of cases, not all, but in some cases, that stone wall is that property's right-of-way line. That's their property line. That's where it's been for years. So there's some sensitivity to that, and it's something, if we had the green light to move the walls closer to the road in that respect, I think it'd be an excellent design to look at that. But that was one of the things we heard first and foremost at meetings 1, 2, and 3 with the public, was
And I
not
could
to
see
touch,
that as like
not
a
to touch
property
the stone
line.
walls. So
Yeah.
with this design, we're only relocating 500 feet of the walls.
So, like on page 3, I think that's between probably Fox Hill and Deerfield. I think that's one section where I think you moved the wall a little bit, but it looks like you're moving it off of the like back onto the property, which is to make more space for the sidewalk.
Yep.
I guess you're saying like you would need their permission, like to you need the same kind of permission if people will allow it to go behind the wall, but you're going to take it off of their property and move it out into the right of way. Similar. You're
Right.
saying you had similar issues with that.
If we had the green light to do that, and it would, by right, could the town just go in and move the wall if it's within the right of way? But you could, but it's also, trying to be mindful of the abutters each and every way. And we'd be forced to go to each abutter, and at the end of the day, the sidewalk might do this through the whole thing. So.
I think the example here would just be like moving it like on this, instead of moving the sidewalk back a foot, you'd bring it out to the street by like 5 feet or something. But so it's not meandering, but it's just putting it on a different side of the sidewalk. But I think the orange line there, that's the right of way. So it appears that it's
right along the
walls
property
are either
line.
on it or on the property. So
that's more or less the case for most of the corridor. So that's typically why we're one of the reasons for the sensitivity towards it. It's been an established property line for hundreds of years.
Quick, because we're up against it. It's 9 o'clock.
So when people said they don't want the stone walls, anything done to them, I think they didn't mean that they wanted them not moved at all. They just want them to still be there. I don't think after they're moved, anyone's going to notice and say, oh, gee, that stone wall used to be 5 feet over there rather than 5 feet over
Yeah, I
here.
think it's worth clarification, but it sounds like Todd has spoken with neighbors. who-
And if you move the stone wall, yes, it's where the property line is, but that doesn't move the property line. The property line is still where it was, and it'll be, and then when you put the sidewalk there, that'll reestablish where the property line was. It's at the edge of the sidewalk.
Sure. Tony, do you want to speak? And then why don't you line up?
Just with all due respect, all the points that everyone has brought up, not only tonight, but for the past 24-plus months, they all are legit. But we've had very personal conversations with pretty much every abutter along Gay Street, and quite frankly, most were not too pleased with what we were doing or what we were proposing on doing. So TEC, the town, the select board, everybody that's been involved in this process for the 2+ years, we've walked a fine line of trying to achieve a formal design that's going to be accepted by the town, by the community, that presents a safer corridor, pedestrian-wise. That being walking from Route 109 all the way and having complete connectivity to Route 1A. And we've done that. But with respect to the rock walls, we've exhausted where can we move them, where can't we move them, how many trees are going to be impacted, how many people, quite frankly, are we going to make very mad in pushing this threshold. So the options are great. I hear it. Everybody hears it. But at some point, we have to say, yes, it's going to be much safer with a sidewalk, but to put ballards up and, take the pure aesthetic value out of Gay Street isn't fair to the residents along Gay Street. And like Mike said, we can do a lot of things.
Yeah, great.
But as director, I won't support it.
I agree.
I want to walk the line and try to make it work.
Okay.
So
Thanks, Todd.
you're welcome.
So one more? Yeah.
Michael Kraft, 30 Coach Lane, Chairman of the Pedestrian Bike Safety Commission. First of all, I have to continue to give great praise to this team of people that have worked very hard on this process in a very delicate and challenging, both physical and political situation. I really appreciate the work that you guys have done. I'm just going to raise some points. I think they've been addressed. I think that you guys are aware of them. I'm just going to throw them out there from a pedestrian safety and aesthetics point of view, so forgive me if it's repetitive. Our priority for the pedestrian bike is number one, safety, but number two, aesthetics is very important. We want that because we want those sidewalks to go in. We want people to be happy with the end result. I didn't hear mention of the crossings from south side of the street to the north side of the street. Okay, good. There was also thought, and maybe Todd, I think you might have addressed it, but narrowing the right-of-way to help with traffic calming, I think, is a big step. I think I heard you say the lane width. Okay, thank you. Also, we had talked about narrowing the entryway from Milk Street, which is wide and it takes sweeping turns, and we're going to choke that down also. Excellent. Okay. I thought I heard you talking, Todd, in your last mention that the property. I like Steve's idea of moving the walls. I thought that the right-of-way of the town extended beyond the walls, but I could be mistaken about that.
Some places.
Okay. Because I know people have a view that, oh, I own up to the wall, even though the town owns it. I understand that mentality. I think the reality is different. We should be able to take advantage of it as long as we do it politely, obviously. I don't know, I know Steve will be upset with me for suggesting this, but I think that the grass buffer and the idea of the aesthetics is really important. And I wonder if it might not be possible to do that if we take exception to the 5-foot and make it a 4-foot or 3.5-foot sidewalk in places to be able to allow a more aesthetic sidewalk by doing that. And I would ask you to just take a look at that. Oh, and the final thing I had was it was mentioned to me that bicyclists are a little bit fearful of granite curbing, and I didn't know if there was some mechanism by which there can be some mitigation of any possible risk with respect to granite curbing and bicycles. That's it for me.
Right.
Thank you.
So what do we need to do tonight for these gentlemen to go off and continue the next stage?
This is your opportunity to comment. So if you have any thoughts as a board, any requests for changes, you should make those tonight, and you should probably take a formal vote, because the plans are at 75% now, and they will be progressing this fall to further those design plans. So if you have any recommended changes, you should make
Yeah,
those
so
clear
Dave, do you
now.
have any recommended changes?
Well, I'd like to see, I'd like to see something done in terms of a buffer, more of a buffer. So I think what Brian had raised, again, if there are places where it could be narrowed, to provide more of a buffer. And like the stuff I was talking about earlier, if there's something you can do in that granite curb, maybe having some kind of a protective barrier in places that are particularly dangerous, because I think some of those areas are, what I see on here that's unprotected are the long stretches along between Fox Hill and Sandy Valley, for example, that cars go 50 miles an hour. So I'd like to incorporate more safety features between the roadway and the curb there, if there's anything you can do in the design for that.
Yeah, that sounds fine. Deb, do you have anything else?
Just to be clear, we're just making a motion for the
To make
study.
any,
It's a recommendation for the design.
For the design,
for-
because there's still a lot of moving parts here.
Yeah.
Right,
In
we're,
terms of financials, land takings, and
right,
things like
this
that.
is still just designing the plan, so you're just a recommendation. I mean, this plan is not formally before you, so it's really a recommendation to
for
look at
any
Nora
additional
to.
changes?
So I think
Yes.
also, some of the reasons why we should weigh in on this, though, is there'll be more meetings. And I know at a select board meeting, there was a lot of discussion about, in order to get the state funding, let's just do we need to have a 6-foot wide thing. And that's like never going to happen because it would require, it would alienate everybody. And that is the best design of a sidewalk, but it's not the best design for Gay Street. And I think as a planning board, we should weigh in on that and say that, this design is, I think, more appropriate for the town than perhaps the ideal scenario of a very wide bike path and everything. And just sort of, I think it should be clear on that it's, that might be the ideal in the abstract, but for Gay Street to preserve the beauty of the street and make it an enjoyable experience for people who will be using this sidewalk, we want to stick to keeping it as natural looking as possible.
I think that conversations from the selectmen come under funding discussions, when that comes more from if you're looking for state funding where they have certain requirements.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking that sometimes there's a reason why the state describes that as what they want, because that's the ideal accommodation, perhaps. But in terms of protecting both the safety and aesthetics for this street, I think the ideal is to have a sidewalk that is a compromise from that.
I agree with you, Dave. How do you two feel about what Dave is suggesting?
Yeah, and I'd like to see more buffers or protective in certain areas, especially where it comes down, curves by Milk Street down that area.
Did you want to, is that worth a motion of any sort, or?
I think we can bullet these into, the motion would be, or I would move that we recommend that the design plans be revised to incorporate, and then if we can bullet these items before completing the final design plans. So that's, but also that so we move to recommend that they be revised, but that we support the overall design. So maybe they start with what I just said, is that this type of design that is a compromise between sort of the ideal pathway and whatever, that we support that, and that we want to see them incorporate safety, as many safety features as possible to protect the pedestrians from the roadway edge. That we want to see that 2-foot shoulder preserved, so that it's 2 feet between the fog line and the granite curb, because historically, like 10 years ago, it was all over the place, okay? And then they were finally repaving the street, and we were going to get it moved to be a 12-foot or 11 feet, and then it didn't happen or whatever. And so it took a long time just to move that white line over. We want to make sure we have a 2-foot distance between that white line and the granite curb. And then whatever sidewalk there is, in that first foot or so where the granite curb is, in places that are particularly vulnerable, we should look at some kind of a mitigation there, something that's aesthetically pleasing. It shouldn't be like giant yellow bollards or anything, but maybe a wooden some sort of wooden post or something that looks like a fence in areas like around Milk Street. And in that area near Buckboard Lane is a particularly tight, dangerous area, so kind of rambling here, so hopefully Abby can. Yeah.
I just want to say one thing, though. I know we've talked about this. I'm totally against a lane with reduction. The high school uses that to run on, and they won't run on the sidewalks. So that's, has to be avoided if at all possible.
Which, what do you mean, lane width, like less asphalt, or, because?
So if they narrow that road, they're not going to run on the sidewalk. They
Yeah,
run on
so
the
what
road
they'll
right
do
now.
is so they're going to maintain the 2-foot,
Buffer.
2 foot between the line and the granite
Okay.
shoulder.
But we're narrowing the street at one point.
No, narrowing the street can actually reduce speed, so they did that on Washington. At one point, Washington was wide, and they narrowed it, and they did tests to show that it actually slowed. And if Paul Sicard was here, Officer Sicard, he would speak to that.
But I think, so there's the yellow line in the middle, and then there's 10 feet to the white line, and then 2 additional feet of pavement still. So it wouldn't be taking away the pavement. The thing is that Gay Street fluctuates a lot in terms of how much pavement there is, but what I'm asking is that we stick
be
to that
maintained.
10-2
The 2 maintained.
as a minimum.
Okay.
Because you need the 2, even, I mean, you get, people have raised the issue of trucks go by with mirrors on them and stuff, and, they're not gonna, the mirror's gonna hang out a little bit, so you need that 2 feet there. And the bikes, too, it's, the granite curb is not great for a person on a bike, but if I've got a couple of feet, at least, with a white line there, I can feel a little better than
Anything else? So did you want to make a motion for that, or it sounds like that was a motion?
Okay.
Longest motion in the
I
world.
think
But when, is it?
I think I got the point. So this is just a recommendation
Yeah.
on the design plans, a recommendation from the planning board.
Just from a schedule perspective, what does the board anticipate? It sounds like you're going to put together a memo, bulletize some feedback.
Yep.
Is that the idea? And what?
Write
what's-
up a letter from the board that would, I guess, go to the select board and public works.
And we could see that memo going into.
Yeah, would
Sure.
would that
Yeah.
work if she just
Yeah.
sends it to us, and if
Mhm.
anybody objects, or, or if there's something missing?
Okay.
What do you anticipate the timing of the memo, just so we can plan for time, schedule and?
That was usually
You're
fast.
gonna play the tape back right after the meeting.
Yeah, pretty soon. It doesn't take long, a couple days, a day.
Awesome. No, that's perfect.
Give yourself a week.
Okay,
I mean, is there anything else that would be helpful in terms of guidance or opinions from us?
We're here to give you an update and, hear your feedback, and it's, listen to the multiple boards. We'll be in front of the commission, conservation, on the 25th, not for a formal filing, but an informal discussion to solicit comments there. We got comments from pedestrian safety. So between the 3 commissions and committees was to get that feedback to help us prepare for that final public meeting.
Good idea. Okay.
Thanks.
I think
Second.
I made.
Made the motion, second, and vote on it. Did you second it?
I'll second it.
We had a motion and a second. All's in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All's opposed? And it passes 4-0. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda is the review proposed housing production plan. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Sarah. There's also a clicker there if you need it, but I also have the wire. Is it there? Oh, it's on the table, sorry. Okay,
Awesome.
thank you.
All right. Good evening. Thank you for putting me on the agenda. My name's Sarah Bouchard. I am the town's housing and zoning agent. I'm here representing the Housing Partnership. which is a group of resident volunteers who have been working on this housing production plan for the better part of the last year. I am giving you a little presentation. It's an informal presentation. We will come before you with a public hearing with a formal recommendation from the Housing Partnership, but since we're nearing our final draft, finally, I wanted to give you the chance to receive a presentation on it, ask any questions, and give some comments before we meet and make that final recommendation to you. I'll try to be mindful of the time. I know it's late, so I'll give you a little overview of the process. I'd like to start with a brief overview of Chapter 40B and the subsidized housing inventory, just to kind of review the regulatory framework that sets the context for housing production plans, kind of an affordable housing 101. I think it will help you understand the housing production plan and its importance. Chapter 40B is the regional planning law. It establishes guidelines for affordable housing in the state. It creates the subsidized housing inventory, which is a comprehensive listing of all affordable housing units in each municipality. And it sets standards for fair housing and establishes the parameters for income eligibility, determining who's eligible for housing based on their income. It also creates the comprehensive permit, which is a streamlined permitting process that encourages development of affordable housing by removing some of the regulatory barriers that can exist in different municipalities. It gives authority to the Zoning Board of Appeals to review a comprehensive permit request to construct a development with affordable housing. And it kind of streamlines all of those processes. Normally, you might see a lot of those applications, but instead, everything goes to the ZBA. Chapter 40B also creates the Housing Appeals Committee, which is obligated to uphold decisions when a town has met their statutory minima on the SHI. So if a town has already constructed its 10% of total year-round housing units as affordable housing, then the Housing Appeals Committee is obligated to uphold the decision of a town if it decides not to give a comprehensive permit to an affordable housing development. In absence of that statutory minima, so if a town has not met that 10%, then if a zoning board of appeals denies an application for a comprehensive permit and the developer appeals that to the Housing Appeals Committee, the HAC would favor that regional need for affordable housing above almost all else. It's difficult for a town to make the case that that denial was appropriate because the HAC places a very strong favor on the construction of affordable housing. So what is affordable housing? It's restricted as affordable in perpetuity, so forever. And the income limits are established at 80% of the area median income. So a unit is affordable if it's reserved for families and households who are eligible at these income rates. Often I find that these numbers surprise people, what that 80% number looks like. So you can see that for this year, a household of 4 can make no more than $89,200 a year in order to qualify for this program. Okay. Chapter 40B also defines affordable housing as coming from different sources. So it can include units that are developed under comprehensive permits, but it can also include local initiative program units. So a lot of the inclusionary zoning requirements that you review as planning board members would participate in that local initiative program. They're not developed under comprehensive permits, but it's something that a local action has compelled their creation. Group homes that are funded by DMH or DDS from the state can qualify for affordable housing on the SHI, and public housing inventory also qualifies as well. So that's units that receive public subsidy for operation. I would be remiss as a housing advocate if I didn't include this small point. Chapter 40B has quite a PR problem, and especially in this line of work, we can get caught up in the regulatory requirements of 40B. I always like to remind folks that Chapter 40B, although it can create some headaches for municipalities that have not properly planned for affordable housing, it has been a significant benefit for lots of people in the Commonwealth. Over 60,000 units of affordable housing have been created since Chapter 40B was written into law in the late 60s. Residents are fully integrated into your community. They are seniors, they are first-time home buyers, and they have benefited from this program in very significant ways. So planning for affordable housing production in Westwood is very much an investment in the community, and the housing production plan is a really important step in that process. So a housing production plan is defined by Chapter 40B. Chapter 40B actually establishes a pretty specific regulatory framework with explicit requirements for what has to be in a housing production plan. It requires that the housing production plan include a needs assessment, kind of review demand for affordable housing of all types, establish some strategies for overcoming obstacles, and set specific goals for production. So what is a housing production plan? It's a consensus document. So whenever possible, particularly in the community engagement pieces, what it tries to do is to find the areas where there are consensus and use that to build ideas going forward. It's a toolbox, not a menu. So that's an analogy I like to use when we're talking about affordable housing. Any successful affordable housing strategy will always be multifaceted. It will come at these problems from different angles. It's not a menu where you have one actual solution and that's how you satisfy your affordable housing needs. So this plan that we're presenting to you really tries to achieve that. It's driven by data and community engagement, and it's also driven by some statewide best practices that are common in a lot of other housing production plans and that the state has identified as being successful efforts. What it is not is a mandate. There are some pretty big ideas in this plan about affordable housing production, and so it is not a commitment by this board or by the select board to definitively do any of these ideas. It's an invitation for further review and study and further engagement from the public to determine whether or not these ideas would be feasible and appropriate for the town. It's comprehensive and multifaceted in the attempt that we'll be able to craft a solution that really works to serve the needs of residents. So the housing production plan includes a needs assessment, which is really a deep dive into the data that's available to us to determine what the market for affordable housing looks like in Westwood and where the gaps are. It includes a pretty significant community engagement piece, which turned out to be my favorite part of this plan. We had a lot of really thoughtful engagement by the public, both in the survey and the visioning workshop. We got a lot of really great feedback and input from residents. Kind of the synthesis of all of those ideas, and then the action plan is kind of a set of goals and ideas that meet each of those goals. So the path to certification here. The Housing Partnership will recommend a final draft to be adopted by the Planning Board. So that's what we will be asking you to do, is adopt this plan. It also needs to be adopted by the Select Board before we can submit it to DHCD for approval. A housing production plan is approved by DHCD for 5-year terms. After it's approved, the municipality that submits that plan has the option to request certification, which is an exemption from appeals. And those certifications are in effect 1 to 2 years, depending on production goals. We are just shy of that first step right now, before we're recommending that final draft to you. So we're very much looking for your comments on this. Approval and certification are not the same thing. An approved HPP has met all of the regulatory requirements and program requirements from the state and from Chapter 40B, but a certificate of compliance is something that a municipality might seek out if it drops below its 10%. If it does, a municipality might request a certification of compliance if it has not met that statutory minima, if it has an approved current housing production plan, and it's met a short-term housing production goal that's set forth in the housing production plan. So basically, this certification, if a municipality is demonstrating progress towards its goals, it might offer a reward of some temporary safe harbor that the town, so the temporary safe harbor would be granted to the town if it receives a 40B request via a comprehensive permit that it feels is not in its best interest. If it's not at that 10% yet, but it's received a certification to say that it's making those intermediate goals, then it receives a 1 or 2 year reprieve from the Housing Appeals Committee. Does that make sense? Okay. So what does that mean for us? We are above our 10%. we have been above that 10% consistently for a number of years. I have an application pending to the state that would raise this number by a few tenths of a percentage point, and waiting to hear back on. The internal forecasting that we have been doing shows that we should stay above that 10%. But there are variables that control that denominator, that year-round total housing units that's based on census information. It's updated every 10 years. We're nearing the next census, and there are some variables that control that denominator that are still unknown based on what housing units get considered by the census in that figure. Regardless, we still keep momentum going on affordable housing production, whether we're above that 10% or slightly below. What the housing production plan does is it helps focus that momentum on strategies that would suit Westwood best and take into account our residents' needs. Also, significantly, it does provide that regulatory safe harbor should we need it.
So that 10.6, is that that's from 10 years ago?
That's current. That's what we have
10 years
on the
was
SHI right now.
10.3, I think.
So we got up to above 11 quite some time ago. And with the inclusion of the university station
So does the
units,
The denominator is 2010, isn't it? Or-
yes,
Yeah, so we don't know exactly.
we don't know how it shifts.
We don't know what the 2020 denominator.
We don't know what the 2020 denominator
But we
will
did a
be.
stress test on it, the town.
We've done some forecasting, and we think we'll stay above that 10%. I mean, by
Including-
year end, I anticipate with all of the units that we already have permitted, I anticipate that will be a full percentage point. I mean, we'll be over 11 by the end of this year, likely.
And does that include accessory apartments?
So we don't have any
And the-
deed-restricted affordable accessory apartments.
But in the denominator, for the percentage that you just mentioned, over 11, does that include accessory?
That's based on that 2010
2010,
year-round.
got it.
Right.
But the stress test that was done, because we know how many units we have in town, was the stress test done, worst-case scenario, with accessory apartments?
All of the data that we have available to us right now shows that we will be close, but we are hopeful that we should stay above that 10%.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep. So the needs assessment, kind of diving into the data, I deleted a lot of slides going on about the data earlier today. I'm kind of glad I did because I know it's getting late, but these are kind of the main points. We worked closely with Massachusetts Housing Partnerships Data Services team to make sure we use the most accurate and comprehensive data available. The big picture here is that affordable housing is a priority in Westwood. Many people here are cost burdened, and this was a statistic that surprised me. Over 20% of owners in Westwood and over 40% of renters are cost burdened, meaning they're spending over 30% of their income on their housing costs. Housing stock in Westwood is mostly owner-occupied, single-family homes. The population is getting older with fewer younger people at a rate that exceeds kind of statewide figures. It's a well-educated community with high labor force participation rates, limited racial diversity. The market's expensive and it's limited, so renters and buyers either can't enter the market or can't locate a home that suits their needs for a variety of reasons. The public engagement component had two major avenues. So one was a survey. The housing survey was open for 3 weeks. We had a great feedback rate, I thought, with over 200 responses. We tried to advertise it and make it as accessible as possible to the community. The intention was really to use this as a tool for collecting information. It was really to give us some data points from people and give them opportunities to participate in ways that were different than attending a public hearing or a visioning session. And I think we were able to achieve that. We got a lot of really thoughtful responses. One thing that I thought that was interesting about the survey is that the demographics of it were actually generally representative of the overall population. In household income, employment status, and whether or not they were renters or owners. It's not a scientific poll. It's certainly not a mandate in any respect, but I thought the information that it generated was really useful to us as we thought about what Westwood's housing needs are. So A full third of respondents in the survey were concerned about their household's ability to maintain their current housing. Affordability was a leading cause of that. And these were highlights for the kinds of housing that respondents were interested in seeing either more or less of in Westwood. So these are, majority percentages. We're really interested in single-family starter homes, and I'd say that that was a theme from all of our community engagement. We saw that a lot in the survey. We saw it a lot in the narrative portion of the survey. We saw it a lot at the visioning session, that was kind of a leading concern for folks about having enough moderately priced starter homes in Westwood. A lot of interest in more senior housing, more affordable or subsidized units, and even some support for more denser styles of housing, duplexes, condos, and apartments. The community visioning session was held in November. We had 25 participants. It was very much a roll up your sleeves kind of participatory event. We really encouraged groups to kind of workshop and engage and kind of give ideas. So all of the exercise materials from that night are included as exhibits in this plan. So I hope you've gone through them. A lot of really interesting ideas tossed around by those groups. They worked really hard. They answered questions about describing your perfect world, what ideally you'd like Westwood to look like, what are the obstacles to kind of your perfect world, and then they did a lot of work around strategizing, and most helpful and something that was required by the housing production plan was they did a lot of mapping where they kind of colored in different shades of town to address their certain ideas. So I put up a graphic of one of those groups that had some ideas, and they kind of colored in places in town where they thought that it could go. Highlights from the visioning workshop were consistent with the survey in a lot of ways. Residents really value schools, the location of Westwood, and the sense of community. People were concerned about affordability. There was a lot of discussion of concerns about tear downs, changing the character of town, talking about threats to intergenerational living. So there was a lot of feedback about, I can't afford to stay now that I'm retired, or my grown children can't afford to move back here. Just kind of concerns about being able to make Westwood living something that they could continue to do for themselves and their families. And priorities really kind of centered on preservation of green and open space and how that character really contributes to town services, and kind of preserving Westwood's nature as an inclusive community. So the housing production plan kind of synthesizes all of this feedback to create a set of goals. They're listed here, and each of the action plan items in the housing production plan ties back to achieving these goals. I'm trying to be respectful of the hour and making sure there's a lot of time for feedback. So I'm probably not going to go through each of these one by one, and certainly if there's questions that any of you have about the goals or the action plan items, we can circle back to that. But these goals, some of them try to address mandatory requirements that 40B sets forth for housing production plans. So in some ways, the specific identification of parcels, those are requirements that 40B requires for a housing production plan that we had to do. An example of that is initiatives that support regional needs and planning collaborations. The state wants to see you working with other communities on efforts that kind of sync. But a lot of these goals were really generated by the community feedback that we received, and the data that came forward with the needs assessment. So to that end, a lot of the action items overlap. They achieve multiple goals. They're listed multiple times. And it's a multifaceted approach to try to address these housing needs from different angles. So I'd love to hear some comments or questions from you to provide back to the Housing Partnership at their next meeting. They'll be meeting in a couple of weeks, at which point they'll hopefully be able to arrive at a final draft. Abby and I will work together at some point to get that final draft back before you for a formal adoption. It would have to go to the select board as well for a similar adoption. And then we will submit it to DHCD if those two boards adopt this plan. So I'd turn it back over to you.
Right. So I'd open it up to the board. So Dave, do you have any comments off the top?
I don't have any.
Yeah, I still have to, so I attended the last meeting, so that was nice. Thank you for that. Is there any way to get a red line version from the current draft versus the previous version that the town had?
I can generate one. I can tell you that the majority of
Has
the
it been, have the sections been moved around?
Not really, no. Some of it was formatting. I did try to address some comments that I received from members of the Housing Partnership and the Comp Plan Steering Committee members on housing that just kind of addressed some points that weren't clear. But the content of this plan has not changed significantly over the last, I'd say, 2 drafts.
When's the next Housing Partnership meeting?
It is hopefully in the next 2 weeks. We have a doodle poll out there in the ether.
Because what we should do, plan to do as board members is provide feedback, maybe to them, so that at least they have what you, any comments that you've had during your read. Of course, it'll come back.
Send it to them in an email? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, should we send comments directly to you?
I'm okay with that. Abby, do you want them to go through you so that you
If
can
you,
collect
do you have
them?
comments now?
Yeah, I don't have any additional comments tonight.
Okay. Is there anything that wasn't clear? Any questions?
I had a lot. I left my sheet at home, so I apologize.
I'm here. I'm always here. You can always call with questions,
Yeah,
or
I was looking for
you can
it.
circulate them through
Right.
Abby so she can provide a memo.
So if you have individual questions or comments, you can send them to me, and then I could provide them to Sarah to provide to the Housing Partnership before the next meeting. If you think of anything while you're reading the report.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much.
Sorry, thank you.
Appreciate it. So next on the agenda, other business items, the comprehensive plan.
Did you want to ask anyone in the audience?
Yeah, regarding that, does anybody from the audience open it back up for the Housing Partnership? Good evening.
Thank you. Nada Milosavljevic, Fabrizio, 32 Webster Street. Brian, I just want to thank you for asking for a red line version. Put my glasses on. And I just have a comment. It seems to me that the continuing theme at these public meetings over the past several years is transparency, and arguably the lack thereof. And my question was, I'd like to know why residents aren't provided with red line versions of all of these draft documents that are constantly being changed and or modified in order to incorporate comments from all of our appointed committees. And my second question was, I would like to know if the planning board gets that courtesy. You answered my question. No, you don't get that courtesy, but I think red line versions, this discussion goes on at all the public meetings, and we don't see red line versions. So I have a housing production plan dated August 9th that was presented at the Housing Partnership Fair Housing Committee meeting on August 29th. And now I have one dated September 10th, and I have no idea what the changes are. Thank you.
Any other public comment? We can move forward. Great. All right, so other business items, comprehensive plan update. So the report from liaisons, so that will start at the next meeting, it looks.
Oh, yes, I was going to ask.
Saw some staging for those.
All right, so the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee, they're meeting next week on the 25th. So they are working now to, when they meet next week, they're going to review a timeline. I would like to work with them. We're trying to possibly start on October 1st with maybe an introduction update in one section. And then if the rest of the steering committee agrees and if they think they'll be ready, I thought possibly 2 sections at a time for initial presentations and discussion of initial goals through the rest of the year. So that would be 2 at a time, 2 subject areas at a time for the rest of the year. So they'll be meeting next week on the 25th to review a specific timeline, and kind of the goal is for them to come together next week with what they have done thus far. So it's our first meeting since the May vision session. I know I had thrown out the question out there to you if it was possible to start earlier at 6:30. It doesn't
Yeah,
sound
with
like that would work to
I don't-
everyone.
It doesn't give me enough
No?
time.
Okay, so we would try to just probably have those sections on first, and then after that, go on to the other
Great.
applications and public hearing items.
And then it would be nice to get, we need to just make sure that we have, the board members have enough time to review the documents so that it's a fruitful, streamlined meeting.
Yep.
So if we could ask that of the steering committee.
Yep, they're working to get them together right now as soon as possible. I think some of you may have seen some drafts with the in your liaison in your specific sections, so you might see in the next couple of
For me, it's a
years.
week in advance minimum, receiving it on a Friday for the next meeting for a draft. Probably won't work with my other.
Okay.
So just to
we'll
keep
try
that in
our
mind when they
best.
have their steering committee meetings, that when they're looking at the timing, if they need to, I need at least a week to review it so that I can come
Right.
prepared to the meeting.
Right, okay, well, we'll try our best. I
Yeah.
know you've had the transportation section for a couple weeks.
Yep.
Couple weeks now, so if you could take a look at that before,
Sure.
until we get
Yeah,
to
yeah, that's
October
perfect.
1st. So
That's perfect.
you should be looking at it now before they get to their
Yeah, so that one is
September
fine.
25th
It's,
meeting.
it's other sections as they go. Great.
So we'll be working with them on that.
Great. Any questions from board members? Okay. And then the selection of the peer review for 215 High Street. So this is coming up. So we received two.
Yes.
uh,
You received two peer reviews, the Beta Group and PSC, Professional Services Corporation.
So for this, I reviewed both of them, and I reviewed the two sample documents that you provided. So for this one, we've used Beta a number of times in the past. PSC, I think, there seems to be thorough. So
Right, I did, if I could just add, I did upload this afternoon, I checked PSC, Professional Services Corporation, they did the review of, there was a small subdivision on Gay Street, 565 Gay Street. There was Canton Terrace, which was the two lots on Blue Hill Drive. This was essentially the zoning freeze one, so it didn't actually get built. And then Westwood Estates.
So do other board members, Dave, do you
Yeah,
have
that's kind of what I was thinking too. I thought it looked like a good proposal. I mean, Beta's great, but we should not become, all we ever do is Beta. So I think PSC looks like a pretty good proposal.
Debbie, Bill?
Yeah, I think we should.
Okay. So do we need to formally vote, or it sounds like all four of us are in favor?
Yes, you should take a vote, and then I'll notify the applicant tomorrow and see if we can get them.
Do you want to make a motion, Deb? For
Make a motion to
PSC?
use PSC as a consultant for
The 215.
215 High Street.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? So it passes 4-0. So thank you for providing that.
All right, thank you.
And next on is the approval of minutes. So we have the July 23rd minutes.
Yes, July 23rd was the only one that was in your packet.
So I reviewed that. I didn't have any additional comments.
I make a motion to approve the minutes from July 23rd, 2019.
So I have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? So that passes 4-0 for the minutes. And then upcoming meetings, October 1st, 22nd, November 5th, 19th, and December 10th. And then if any board members aren't going to be available for a meeting, just let the rest of the board members know ahead of time, so that we can, if we need to, we can have remote or anything like that.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn?
One more thing, just wanted to note, there was that training in
Wait, tomorrow
Norwood.
night.
Tomorrow night is one. We learned about it just recently,
So
but
no
there
more than
is.
two can go. Or there's a training in Norwood for board members.
I'm a little tied up tomorrow night. select board meeting.
Oh, no, I'm not asking, as far as attendance from board members for no more than two. And do you have information on it, the location and time?
It's in Norwood.
7 o'clock.
It was at 7 p.m. on the 18th. Yes, police station.
And what is the title of this training? Do
This
you have
one is specifically for roles and responsibilities of planning board and zoning board. So we invited the zoning board members as well.
it? That's great. So since only 2 can go, is it public?
Yeah,
Oh, why don't you just grab the mic?
you're right. Pat,
So
this
it's
is
not
this is a
it's a cla-
training for, yeah, it's citizens training.
You're not going to
Plan
be
and
discussing
collaborative.
anything substantively?
It's like a roles, it's roles and
That wasn't enough
responsibilities,
answer
yep,
for
sorry.
me.
It was roles and responsibilities for zoning board and planning board members that the citizen.
Best not to.
Well, as long as you're not going to be discussing or applying it to ongoing issues within the town and deliberating those, I think you can probably attend. But it is, I hate to say no to an educational opportunity, but you just need to be very careful. And in the future, if you have something like this, there's no harm in posting it 48 hours in advance. You knew about it a week earlier, you can post it and say they might potentially attend. You put people on notice who might want to go to make sure you're not discussing things, deliberating publicly.
Thank you, Pat. So who is interested in going tomorrow night?
I'm
Maybe.
interested, I'm not sure I can make it.
Dave?
Nope, I haven't.
So that's easy, so.
Okay, Brian and Bill, okay.
So I may go.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for
All right.
that.
So you don't have an issue.
Thank you. Anything else, Abby?
Nope, that's it.
Okay. Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
We have a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second?
Second?
Motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Meeting is adjourned.